Hello. Yes, I agree with what you've been saying there. The scaffolding of, say, an authentic feasibility study report or a research grant proposal or whatever, it needs to be talked about. I think there's a further step, and that is it also needs to be shown. I I think there's a certain amount of resistance by a lot of academics to show models of the kind of writing or the kind of construction that we ask them to achieve. So not just a matter of talking, but showing them, maybe even analyzing, annotating a model, and then letting them work through that way.
That's a great comment, Ursula, and I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say when you see the second example I have, because that academic here has, because as you say, a lot of people say, and they say similar things even about a rubric and some criteria for the assessment task. There's a bit of a resistance to giving students too much help, giving them too much information so that they'll all hand the same thing in. But my second example has such a great use of some technologies to really demonstrate that. So yes, hopefully you'll find that really interesting when you hear about it. Are there any more comments, or shall we head on to our first example? Now, I'll just talk about these two. As I mentioned earlier on, just accidentally, as part of my PhD study into these areas, I was interested in how people use technology, specifically social networking tools, I might add, web tools, for supporting the assessment of higher order learning. And I came across these two Capstone units, and the really interesting thing for me was the range they had of technology. So in fact, I was looking for their use of web tools, but I ended up being intrigued by their use of all types of technologies, in particular some pretty low range ones, just to meet the very specific requirements they had in their units. And so that's what led me to write them up as such interesting examples. So if it's okay, I'll just go through talking about this one, and then we can stop for some comments, because I really want to make enough time for people to, have a conversation about it. So, yes, that's a good comment. Yes, so maybe you should have a collection of big tasks so colleagues can see what they look like. That's what we've been working on here. We've had Professor Angela Brew, working on our project. So, yes, getting students to do the big tasks, and she has some great examples of one of her fabulous ones that I just love is a group of, I think they're mechanical engineering students that have to make, they all have to go out at the end of their capstone unit, they have this competition, well, this was one example, where they had to make a block of ice, a 10-kilo block of ice or something, get from one side of the lake to the other using only one candle power. So they had to put all of their knowledge into competing in this race in little teams where they could build some contraption to get this ice block across. So, she has those fabulous examples, and it really is motivating when people can see what they're like. So yes, that's part of what I did when I was capturing these. We made them into podcasts and also some text-based case studies to support people. So along the lines of examples. So let's just have a look at this first example. Now, this is a person who works, Debbie Richards is one of our associate professors here, and she works in computing. So I guess she has a great group of students who are interested in computing. They're very technology savvy, but they're also quite diverse. And she has 350 students in her average group, and she's very focused on authentic group projects. So that's really one of her main interests, this notion of an authentic group project. And I hinted earlier on about how she works with a lot of industry contacts. She actually worked in industry for quite a long time. So she gets her students, if they have a high grade point average, they go out and actually work. It goes for 12 months, this unit, which is a very rare thing at Macquarie. Most of our units are one semester rather than two. But these students who do well in their previous units can go out and actually work in a work integrated environment, solving a computing problem in an industry. So there are people who work in groups like that, but there are also on-campus students working on similar projects that have been generated in industry contexts. So they are very authentic. And if you look at her learning outcome, this is really her objective, if you like, to prepare students for working in teams in industry by producing a complete solution from the initial problem statement. So her learning outcomes, which I haven't gone into detail about here, but they are in the written example of this case study. They're all about identifying the problem and the parameters they have and looking at the requirements of the client and some of the restrictions and the critical requirements that are needed, and putting together an initial plan and a project plan and how they're going to address this, and doing sort of specification documents and all of that type of documentation that the students would have to put together if they were actually employed as a consultant in an industry context. So the learning outcomes are very clearly focused on those types of outcomes that would be necessary in a project in this context. So she's got a fairly large group, as you can see, and she's used the technologies in a really interesting way, partly all around the scaffolding. There are lots of details around those in the written case study that you can follow up a bit more, but because of our interest on technologies, I'll just talk about these. So the first thing she does is just has a basic Blackboard space. We use Blackboard here as our institutional learning management system. And so she's just used Blackboard, and she's got lots of resources online. And the reason that is such a strength in this case is because she has students in a diverse environment, in a dispersed environment. So if they get home from work at 7 o'clock at night and they're trying to work out how to do some technical requirements, she's got things like scaffolding linked to some of the foundation principles that the students would have heard. I can just hear an echo that someone might have my voice coming through someone speaking. So she has this great space where it's just Blackboard, it's really basic, but she's got links to the foundation principles. So she assumes that the students are going to have forgotten some of the stuff they learned in first year and second year. So she's got links up there to say, if you forgot about this, some software development information they should have known, then she's got the links there for them. She's got some of the reminders about some of the key things that they talk about in the unit. She's got some templates. So, for example, one of the first assessment tasks is that they have to submit a project plan, which talks about things like the strengths and weaknesses of their group and what the project is and what they've identified about the client's needs. But she starts off with the assumption that they won't necessarily know how to write the first draft project plan. So she puts up a template to say, okay, when you're doing your draft plan, this is actually what you need to think about. And then the first assessment task, surprise, surprise, is that little group submitting a draft plan to her so that she can give them some very rapid feedback on how that plan's looking before they progress on to the next step.